I never thought moving into a peaceful suburban neighborhood would lead to threats against my children. We chose this place because it looked like the kind of street where kids could ride their bikes safely, where neighbors waved from their porches, and life slowed down just a little bit. I should have known something was off the first time I met the HOA president, Mr. Raymond. He wasn't the welcoming type. Cold handshake, eyes like a hawk, and he always seemed to be watching. At first, I thought he was just one of those uptight, rule followers, the kind that take their clipboard a little too seriously. But I didn't know that behind those strict policies was a man who ruled with intimidation. My kids, Emma and Jake, were just starting to settle in. Emma was 12 and loved painting with chalk on the driveway, drawing rainbows and cartoon animals. Jake was 9 and practically lived on his scooter. They weren't troublemakers, just kids being kids. One Saturday afternoon, they were outside, laughing and playing. I was inside, folding laundry, when I heard loud voices. I looked out the window and saw Mr. Raymond standing over my daughter, his finger pointing inches from her face. My stomach dropped. I rushed outside, heart pounding. Before I could even ask what was going on, Raymond barked at me. "Your children are defacing community property. That chalk is unsightly. This is your final warning." His voice was sharp, not just annoyed, but angry. I looked down. It was just chalk, on our driveway, and a bit near the sidewalk. Nothing permanent, nothing offensive. My daughter's eyes were wide, and Jake was frozen behind her, clearly scared. I tried to stay calm, told him politely that it was just chalk, and it would wash away in the rain. But Raymond leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "We don't tolerate rule breakers in this neighborhood. If you don't keep your kids in line, the HOA will take appropriate action." Then he walked off like nothing had happened. That night, Emma asked me if they were going to get us kicked out. Jake refused to go outside the next day. I started realizing this was more than just a grumpy old man with rules. This was something darker. I talked to a few neighbors, and they all said the same thing. Raymond has always been like that. Just keep your head down. Don't give him a reason. Some even told me they got fined for things like having a garden hose out, or parking slightly crooked. A week later, we got our first fine, $200 for unauthorized sidewalk art. I thought it was a joke, but it was real. I tried appealing it, but the HOA board denied the appeal without explanation. Then came a second warning, this time for child misconduct and failure to supervise minors. It felt like a setup. My husband, Brian, worked long hours and traveled often. I didn't want to burden him with this yet. I figured I could handle it. But then, things escalated. One afternoon, while I was inside helping Emma with her homework, Jake came running in, pale and shaken. He said a man in a dark SUV stopped in front of the house and told him to stay off the sidewalk unless you want trouble. I flew out the door, but the vehicle was gone. I called the HOA office, demanded answers, but they denied having any knowledge of such an event. That night, I called my brother. My brother, David, is a Marine. Always has been the protector in the family, even before he joined the service. He's calm, collected, and has that quiet strength that makes you feel safe just being around him. I didn't want to involve him, didn't want to escalate things, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything, from the chalk drawings to the threats. There was silence for a few seconds after I finished. Then he said, "I'll be there tomorrow." He arrived the next afternoon, dressed casually in jeans and a gray t-shirt, but there was something in his stance that made him look like he was still in uniform. My kids ran to him immediately. David hugged them both, then turned to me and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." David spent the evening sitting with the kids, letting them tell him their side. He listened, nodded, and asked questions. Then he went outside and walked the perimeter of the house, noticing small things. I hadn't security cameras from the HOA angled toward our home, a second sign posted on our lawn that I hadn't seen before, stating, "Ongoing HOA surveillance area." It felt like we were being watched. That night, David sat with me in the kitchen. He pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "We're going to document everything. Every encounter, every notice, every suspicious vehicle. And tomorrow, I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Raymond." I was nervous. I didn't want any confrontation, but David was calm. "Don't worry. I'm not going to make a scene. I just want him to know that your family is not alone." The next morning, David dressed in a clean polo and khakis, his military dog tag tucked beneath his shirt. He walked over to the HOA office, which was just a few blocks away. I watched from the window as he entered. A part of me wanted to go with him, but I knew he needed to do this alone. He was gone for almost an hour. When he returned, he didn't say much, just smiled and said, "Let's give it a few days." I asked him what he said to Raymond, but he only replied. I reminded him of the laws regarding harassment and made sure he understood what kind of attention this HOA might attract if it kept targeting families unlawfully. The way he said it, calm but firm, made me believe he had made his point. 2 days passed. No warnings, no fines, no SUV parked outside. The cameras on our side of the street were Jake went outside again, cautiously, but he smiled for the first time in a while. Emma drew a new rainbow on the driveway. I felt a weight lift off my chest. On the third day, an envelope was slipped under our door. It wasn't from the HOA, was anonymous. Inside was a single piece of paper with typed words. Careful who you bring into this neighborhood. We are always watching. I felt my knees go weak. I handed it to David. He read it carefully, folded it, and put it in his notebook. Now, it's time to take this further. That evening, he called an old friend of Hiza, former military investigator, who now worked in private security. David wanted everything documented, everything legal. If the HOA or anyone connected to it was engaging in unlawful behavior or threatening children, they were going to be held accountable. We installed our own security cameras. David gave my kids a lesson in safety: what to look out for, how to respond, when to call for help. I hated that it had come to this, but I was grateful he was here. What we didn't know was that David's quiet investigation was about to uncover something much bigger than harassment. When my brother Sam got out of the car, he didn't look angry or loud. That was the thing about him, he didn't need to shout. The moment he stood in front of those HOA board members, the mood changed. His broad shoulders, straight posture, and calm but firm tone made them instantly uneasy. He shook hands with no one. He simply nodded once and said, "I'm here to talk." I stood next to him as the main HOA enforcer. Greg, the same man who had cornered my son, came down the steps of the community hall. Greg had that plastic smile on again, but it didn't last long. Sam looked him in the eyes, not blinking once. "You the one who threatened my nephew?" Sam asked in a quiet, steady voice. Greg stuttered. No, I just had a word with him. He was skateboarding in a restricted zone." Sam didn't move, and that required you to get in his face, call him names, scare him, make him cry. Greg's face turned red. I didn't look. I didn't mean anything by it. We have rules. Sam looked at me and then back at Greg. You think being part of a neighborhood board gives you the right to bully kids. Now the rest of the board started to show up. 2 older women, 1 younger man, and a woman who always wore sunglasses indoors for some reason. They all looked confused at first, until I spoke. "This is my brother. He's a retired Marine. He's here because you made the mistake of involving my children in your little power game." The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of the older women, Linda, who I had actually known for a while, tried to step in. "Let's not escalate things. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Sam raised a hand. "Misunderstanding? You sent a fine because my son left his basketball on the front porch. You threatened legal action when my daughter's art chalk stayed on the sidewalk. You threatened my family over chalk drawings. And then your man here yelled at my nephew." The sunglasses lady muttered, "There are rules." Sam slowly walked toward them. Not in a threatening way, but in the way only someone trained in discipline can. Calm, controlled, precise. I served 2 tours overseas, so my family could come home to peace. Not to be pushed around by people who think rules matter more than decency. This ends now. Greg scoffed. "What are you going to do? Intimidate us into changing the rules?" Sam smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't warm your heart. It froze your spine. "No," he said. "I'm going to follow the rules too, every single one of them, and I'm going to make sure every time you break them, you're held accountable, just like you do to my sister." That's when things shifted, because Sam had already started collecting evidence. He had spent 2 nights walking around the neighborhood, taking photos, recording notes, gathering video of all the violations that the board ignored. The broken fence at Greg's property, the overgrown bushes at Linda's, the pool party thrown by the sunglasses lady that ran past curfew, the litter Greg's dog left behind every morning. He handed each of them a neatly printed folder with time-stamped photos. He said, "If you don't, rescind the violations against my sister's home and apologize to her kids. These go public. To the neighborhood, to the HOA council above you, and to a lawyer I already spoke with." There was silence. I had never felt so protected before. Not because Sam was threatening anyone physically, but because he used their own system, their own rules. He made them feel the same pressure they had placed on us. Linda opened her folder and swallowed hard. She said, "Maybe we were a little too harsh." Greg looked like he was ready to explode, but he said nothing. The sunglasses lady didn't even speak. They knew they were cornered. Sam looked at them once more and said, "Respect goes both ways. You want people to follow the rules. Set the example. Don't ever drag my family into your little power trips again." With that, we walked away. But that wasn't the end. The next few weeks, things started changing. The violations were quietly withdrawn. My mailbox wasn't watched anymore. My kids played outside without fear. The notices stopped. Greg stopped walking past our house. And then one day, a letter came in the mail, an official apology from the HOA board. They didn't admit to wrongdoing, but the wording was enough. They regretted any miscommunication and reaffirmed their commitment to building a respectful and safe neighborhood environment. That was their way of saving face. But we knew, everyone knew, Neighbors started asking me what had happened. I told them the truth about the violations, the threats, and how my brother held them accountable. One by one, others started speaking up. A young couple next door shared how they had been fined for improper mailbox decorations. An elderly widow down the street had been warned for using her garden hose too early in the morning. It was like someone had opened a door, and the silence broke. The HOA had ruled through fear, but now fear wasn't working. People started organizing. They started attending meetings. Real meetings. Transparent ones. Sam even came to one and sat in the back silently, just his presence reminding them to behave. Eventually, Greg resigned. He said it was due to personal stress, but the truth was clear. He had lost the power he abused. Linda stayed, but she was no longer loud. The younger guy, Mark, turned out to be decent and was actually helpful once the tone changed. HOA didn't disappear, but it became fairer, clearer, more human. And Sam. He went back home after a month. He hugged me before he left and said, "You always had strength. You just forgot it for a while. Never let them make you feel small again." I looked at my kids playing outside without fear and smiled. That was all the strength I needed. I didn't sleep much that night. My kids were afraid, and my wife couldn't stop checking the window. Even the dog, usually calm, stayed close to the door. Every little sound outside made us flinch. We didn't know if they'd come back or try something worse. I felt powerless until I remembered I wasn't alone in this. The next morning, I called my brother. Not just any brother, a former U.S. Marine, served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a few places he still won't talk about. His name's Marcus, calm, sharp, and when needed, incredibly firm. I hadn't wanted to involve him, but threatening my kids changed everything. I told him everything. He didn't say much, just, "I'll be there by sunset." That whole day, I could feel the tension in my chest. My wife kept asking if this was going to make things worse, but I just said, "He won't cause trouble, he'll bring clarity." By 6 p.m., Marcus rolled up in his dusty truck. No fanfare, no long hugs, just a nod, a glance at the kids, and a quiet, "You okay?" They nodded slowly. He knelt down, smiled at them, and said, "Uncle Marcus is here now. No one's going to scare you again." We ate dinner together, trying to act normal, but Marcus kept looking around the house, checking sightlines through the windows, noticing little things I had missed, tire tracks near the mailbox, footprints in the garden bed. Quietly, he was building the scene in his head like a soldier mapping a battlefield. After the kids went to sleep, we sat out back. He finally spoke. "This isn't just a couple of bored HOA guys flexing. This is intimidation. Controlled, planned. Who leads them?" I told him about the HOA board president, Alan Cooper. Retired accountant, but with this creepy obsession with order. Marcus nodded. "I've met his type. Pencil pushers who act like generals." He asked for every detail. The visit, the warnings, the camera footage, the voice recordings. He reviewed everything silently. Then he said, "Tomorrow, we meet Alan. You'll come with me." No threats, just presence. At sunrise, we walked to the HOA office, a small rented space near the community pool. I was nervous. Marcus was completely calm. We walked in. Alan was there with 2 other board members. His smirk faded the moment he saw Marcus. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice even, steady. "We're here to resolve a problem." Alan blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." Marcus pulled out a printed photo of the car parked outside my house the night the enforcers showed up. "This your vehicle?" Alan hesitated. "It's registered to the HOA." Marcus nodded. "And these 2 men?" He showed the video stills. Alan stammered. "Just security checks. Routine." Marcus leaned forward. "Routine doesn't include threatening children. You crossed a line. This ends today." One of the board members tried to speak, but Marcus fixed him with a look that made even me shift in my seat. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to prevent them. You want rules followed? Great. Start with your own. Threatening minors is a federal offense. You want to test that in court." Alan was sweating now. "Look, maybe things got out of hand. We'll issue a formal apology. It won't happen again." Marcus stared for a long moment, then stood. "We'll take that apology in writing, signed by the board. And any contact with this family outside of official notice will be considered harassment." "Understood," Alan nodded. His voice cracked slightly. "Understood." We walked out without another word. Later that day, a hand-delivered letter arrived, full of legalese and fluff, but the key words were there: apology, acknowledgement, assurance of no further contact. My wife read it 3 times, then finally let out a breath. Maybe it's over, but Marcus wasn't convinced. That night, he said, "Bullies retreat, but they don't vanish. You'll need to watch." He stayed the week. Every morning he jogged the neighborhood, casually noting license plates, watching faces. People began to notice. The enforcers never returned. The neighbors, who once avoided us, started waving again. One night, sitting outside, Marcus said something I'll never forget. "You know, most people think violence is power. It's not. Presence is power. Boundaries, backbone. That's what keeps the wolves back. I nodded. I understood. Now, on Marcus's last night, we had a barbecue. Just us, the kids, some music. Laughter returned to the backyard. For the first time in weeks, we felt safe. As he packed to leave the next morning, he handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "Legal resources, contacts, security steps, and a little surprise. You'll know when to use it." Then he drove off. I thought maybe that was the end of it, but I was wrong, because just 2 weeks later, something else happened. Something that would pull my whole neighborhood into the light and show just how deep the HOA's control really ran. But this time, I was ready. And Marcus had left me more than just advice. He'd left me a plan. The night after the confrontation with Mr. Carlyle, things felt quieter, but it was the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, like the calm before a storm. My brother Jason didn't say much, but I could see his mind was working. Every time he stepped outside, he scanned the perimeter, checking lights, watching cars, noting who passed by. He didn't trust any of them, now not the HOA board. Not the neighbors who had turned their heads, not even the local security they claimed was for our safety. Jason had served multiple deployments in some of the world's toughest terrains. He had a way of reading tension in the air before anything even happened, and what he was picking up now, it wasn't good. He didn't say it, but I could feel it in how he moved. He started checking the windows at night, locking the back gate, double-checking the kids' windows, and he even put a wooden dowel in the tracks of the sliding door. Silent measures of someone preparing for something he couldn't quite explain. Yet then came the anonymous note, folded and slipped under our front door in the early morning hours. It was a single sheet of paper, no name, no signature, just 5 words, "Take your dog and leave." It didn't sound like a neighbor complaint anymore, it sounded like a threat. Jason picked it up before the kids saw it and stared at the paper. For a long while, he didn't even look surprised. He just asked me, "Has it gotten this bad?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was nod, numb. Yes, it had. Jason didn't say a word after that. He went into the garage and didn't come out for nearly an hour. When he finally did, he had a plan. He told me to gather every document, every email, every notice, every recording of HOA interactions I'd ever saved digital or on paper. He was going to build a case. He said we weren't just going to defend ourselves anymore. We were going to take action. Over the next few days, Jason started knocking on doors. Not to cause trouble, but to talk. He wanted to know who had dealt with the HOA personally, who had been fined unfairly, warned over petty things, intimidated, or harassed. At first, people were hesitant. Most didn't want to get involved. But one by one, they started sharing. A single mom down the street had been fined for planting a flower bed. An elderly couple got a citation for a flag on their porch that was too bright. Someone else had been given notice for leaving their trash can out an hour too long. All of them had been too afraid to speak up before. But Jason, he wasn't afraid. Word started to spread that the Marine was asking questions, and the HOA didn't like it. The next evening, a black SUV showed up again, parked just beyond our house. This time, Jason walked straight toward it. I watched from the front door, heart pounding. The SUV backed up slowly and drove off. Jason didn't chase it, he just stood there, arms folded, watching the taillights vanish. The following morning, we got an official notice posted on our door. This one had letterhead. It accused us of instigating division in the community, and threatened legal action if we continued spreading misinformation and encouraging disorder. Jason laughed. "They're scared," he said. "Good. But even so, I was scared too. Scared that this would escalate even further. And I was right. 2 days later, our kids' bikes went missing. Gone from the backyard without a trace. The gate was still locked. No break-in, just gone. That was it for Jason. He installed cameras that night, hidden high resolution, with cloud backup. The next morning, he reported the theft to the police, even though we both knew there was little they'd do. That night, Jason held a small meeting at our home. Quiet, only 6 neighbors, all people who had been affected. He laid out his plan. He wasn't just going to go after the HOA, he was going to expose them, not with threats, not with violence, but with cold, hard evidence. He began collecting testimonies, documenting fines, taking pictures of HOA board members breaking their own rules. He even followed Mr. Carlyle from a distance and noted how he parked in a red zone regularly while others got towed for less. Then something happened that shifted everything. One of the neighbors, a retired librarian named Mrs. Hanley, brought forward an envelope she had hidden for months. Inside was a recording audio from an HOA board meeting that had accidentally been left broadcasting on the community radio frequency. The things they said in that meeting. Disgusting. Laughing about fining elderly residents. Calling kids street noise. Referring to my brother without naming him as a rogue dog that needed to be put down. Jason got quiet when he heard that. The next few days, he edited the audio and prepared a dossier. He didn't just send it to the community email group, he sent it to a local investigative reporter who had covered HOA abuses before. Then he sat back and waited. It didn't take long. The reporter reached out the same week, asked for an interview. Jason declined, said the story wasn't about him, it was about a broken system. So he passed the reporter to the victims' neighbors who had stories to tell, backed with proof. And when the story broke, it was like a match lit under gasoline. Emails poured in from surrounding communities, thanking Jason for speaking up. Former residents of our own neighborhood came forward with stories from years ago, and the HOA. Suddenly, they were scrambling. The SUV didn't show up anymore. Notices stopped arriving. Carlisle disappeared from the streets, but even in the silence, we weren't sure it was over. Late one evening, Jason found a package outside our door. No label, no postage, just a black folder. Inside were photocopies of his military discharge papers, his service record. Highlighted in red pen was the word, dishonorable. It wasn't true. He had served with honor, fought for his country, saved lives. But someone had gone out of their way to dig, to lie, to humiliate. It was a message. We know who you are. Jason didn't flinch. He said, then they should also know, I don't scare easy. And with that, he kept moving forward. By the next morning, things had changed in the neighborhood. We didn't hear the usual early morning shouting from Mr. Reynolds or the loud engine of his golf cart patrolling like a mini-tank. It was eerily calm. I walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and glanced down the street. A few neighbors were out, most of them nodding at me, some even waving. That hadn't happened in months. Maybe it was the rumor mill doing its work already, or maybe it was respect finally being shown after what had unfolded the previous night. Tom hadn't said much before he left. He never did. But the look in his eyes when he walked away from the HOA office told me that whatever he did, it was final. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Ms. Heller, one of the quieter HOA members, standing nervously with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Her face was soft, less cold than usual. I just wanted to say, she began, I didn't agree with what they did, threatening your children, that crossed a line. She handed me a letter. This is from the board. Mr. Reynolds has been asked to step down as HOA president. An internal review is happening, and your family has been cleared of all violations. No fines, nothing on record. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing what I was reading. She looked at me and added, and for what it's worth, thank your brother. He reminded a few of us what community actually means. As she walked away, my wife came out holding our youngest. I handed her the letter. She read it, eyes wide, then looked at me. Did he really do it? She asked. Did Tom actually get them to listen? I nodded, smiling. He didn't just talk. He made them feel what it's like to mess with the wrong family. We decided to walk around the neighborhood. We hadn't done that in a while. It used to feel like enemy territory. But this time, it felt different. Some people apologized. Others simply said good for you under their breath. Apparently, Tom's visit was more public than I thought. Later, I found out that Mr. Reynolds had resigned immediately after Tom's visit. According to someone on the inside, Tom didn't threaten violence. He didn't need to. He just sat across from the board, laid out every illegal intimidation tactic, and explained the kind of legal and public exposure they were opening themselves to. He had brought evidence to video clips of their behavior, neighbors' testimonies, and a full rundown of HOA bylaws that proved they'd gone far beyond their legal limits. But what shook them most was how calm Tom was when he described what could happen next: lawsuits, community outrage, public records, even exposure to the media. And he made one point crystal clear: they messed with his family. Tom never raised his voice, never broke a sweat. But when a Marine walks into a room and calmly lays out the truth with absolute conviction, people listen. A few days later, we received another letter, this one from the HOA's legal office. It was a formal apology for inappropriate conduct and unprofessional behavior from certain members of the board. They also issued a neighborhood-wide update. All fines issued over the last 3 months were suspended for re-evaluation. The neighborhood felt lighter. The new interim HOA president, Mrs. Garza, a quiet but reasonable retired school principal, actually came by our house, personally. She thanked us for bringing the issues to light and asked if I'd be willing to join a volunteer committee to help rebuild trust in the community. My wife laughed when I told her, "You, on the HOA." I smiled. Maybe it's time the right people had a say, but what truly mattered was the change we saw. Kids played outside without worry. People waved more. That constant feeling of being watched, judged, reported, it began to fade. One evening, Tom came back over for dinner. He was quiet, as usual, but I could tell he was watching everything. The kids laughing, my wife setting the table, the neighbor mowing his lawn without worry of a citation. As we sat on the porch later, sipping beer, he finally said, "You know, it's not about winning, it's about standing up when it matters. They went after your kids. That made it my problem." I looked at him. nodded. You always show up when I need you. He chuckled. Always will. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the porch lights flickered on, I realized something deeper. Sometimes, it takes just one person, one voice, one visit, one moment of courage to turn the tide. Tom wasn't loud. He didn't need to be, but his presence reminded everyone what real strength looks like. And in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming our peace, our dignity, and our home. The neighborhood changed. Not perfectly, but enough. And every time I hear a knock on the door, I no longer fear what rule I might have broken. Instead, I remember the moment everything shifted when my Marine brother reminded a neighborhood what it means to protect your own. Because when family is threatened and justice is ignored, there's always someone who's ready to step up. And in our case, that someone wore boots, carried honor like armor, and made sure his brother's kids could sleep in peace again.